Welcome, 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 fellas, to the final edition of the 3DownNation podcast in 2025. Of course, John Hodge, JC Abbott, along with me, fellas. When you look back on the year that was, you can only say one. JC, I'm looking at you. What was your favorite moment, be it in the CFL, the podcast, something that has to do with 3downnation.com, of the year overall? JC, I know you need some time to think about these things. So, John, we'll start with you.
Just put me on the spot. I will say the highlight for me was getting to cover a Grey Cup in my home city. I know other members of the media sometimes talk about home Grey Cups. They don't hit like when you're traveling. And don't get me wrong, I like traveling for Grey Cups. It's fun to be in other places and experience life in another Canadian city and do so for like a full week, right? Sometimes when you visit a place for a day or a night, you don't really get a good sense of what's what. So I do like traveling for Grey Cups, but I had a blast being at home. It was great to get out, see people, show people the city, and the weather was great, and the game was great. Like, I thought from top to bottom, it was a great event, and it was a real pleasure being able to cover it in my home city.
Well, my highlight is getting to see Alan Doyle live in concert at a Grey Cup, which was just like nirvana for me. But if we're going something different than Grey Cup, so I'm not copying Hodge, I'll say when I look back on 2025, the one thing that I will never forget is doing live CFL draft coverage without a functional draft tracker. And I'm not the world's greatest multitasker, but I felt like a superhero that night, whipping back and forth between team social medias. So that is my, maybe not my best memory, but my most indelible memory from 2025.
The highlight that stands out for me, fellas, is an easy one because there's a new era for us with Harvard Media. And I want to send a shout out to you two in particular and the contributors for having trust and sticking with, I guess, the three of us through the process to get to that new era. So that's not necessarily a moment, but I think it is a potentially monumental step for the website, the operation, the outlet, however you want to put it. And I think you guys just deserve a massive shout out for, keeping your heads down and helping make 3DownNation continually as great as it is. So that's not necessarily a moment, but I think it's a real key for 3DownNation to continue to keep on going. And then honestly, guys, my favorite moment specifically with the two of you, I probably couldn't even recall all of them, but are those funny inside jokes or the situations that happen because we're so comfortable with each other now. Like JC and I sharing hotel rooms now for 2 straight years at Grey Cup, and just the laughs that come out of that back and forth. So those are the little things that I think about. It's not like being in a big locker room at the University of Guelph, drink, but it's very similar to that with the relationship that we all have, because we can be so open and honest with each other. And don't get it twisted, people out there, okay? We get frustrated with each other too. Hodge is usually the most sane and even keel one. I get fired up definitely at times and push some buttons, so I'm to blame for some of what happens behind the scenes. But those moments that either happen out of nothing or happen from us knowing each other so well are my favorite moments, even though I can't recall any specific ones.
Yeah, I think everybody can relate to feeling really pissed off at one point or another with a family member or a good friend. And I almost think, in a way, the right, so to speak, to get really pissed off at somebody is something that you earn, because you don't get really angry at random strangers, because random strangers are just random strangers. They might annoy you in traffic for like half a second and then you forget about them, right? I think frustration, anger, we think of those as negative emotions, but in a way, it's almost like you earn it, because if you're not passionate about something, you don't care about something or somebody, then you're never going to get that upset, because it's like, well, I don't care, right? Anger and frustration is not the opposite of like joy. It's the opposite of apathy, in my opinion. Like, passion is passion, baby, right? We've all been frustrated with people before. So yes, we get frustrated with each other. And that's okay. We also generally, I think, get along really well. We don't have a toxic environment. But yeah, do we get after it sometimes? Absolutely. And I'll say this, behind the scenes, some of the CFL's best teams bicker and fight every freaking day. So if it works, it works, right? And I think we work well. And I hope our listeners, our viewers, and our readers who continue to grow each and every year agree. I think they do, because obviously we're doing something right.
Well, thanks to Papa Hodge for another wonderful pep talk. This is a glimpse at what we get behind the scenes when we're squabbling. He is always the level-headed one, the steady hand, and I appreciate you a ton, Hodge. But I think we demand the best out of each other. And every time, even if it's not in that moment, when we have disagreements or we see things differently, it changes the way the other person looks at it as well. And I think that's how our content has evolved so well over the last number of years that we've worked together, is we hold each other accountable, we challenge each other to grow, and because of that, we become more complete in what we do.
Agree.
That's one of my favorite parts, fellas.
Credit to you, Justin, for your leadership. And I also just want to say how unbelievably excited I am to cover a CFL season in 2026 while we're not also simultaneously selling our entire business. That is going to be great, to just focus on a season, which is super time consuming and busy and all those things. It's good busy. It's fun work 99% of the time, but it's a ton. And then to have another massive project ongoing, like it's kind of like renovating your kitchen and your bathroom at the same time. It's like this was the worst idea. If this, maybe one or the other would have been nice. And then maybe we could just do no renovations for a while after that. So 2025 was very hectic in that regard, a little chaotic. So 2026, I feel like we've hit the ground running great here with Harvard. The plane is flying at altitude, and we're just going to kill it even more, not having any distractions along the way.
But you guys never complained, and neither did our contributors. And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't give a shout out to our readers, viewers, listeners, people in the CFL community that have supported us now for over 10 years. It's wild to think about, but oftentimes I find myself, during holiday seasons, thinking about how thankful I am to be able to do, and I don't want to speak for you guys, but I think you would agree, what we do for a literal living, right? There's some people who are usually like scared to ask about, well, do you guys have other jobs, or is 3DownNation your full-time thing? It's like, no, we have put in the work to be able to have 3DownNation as our full-time focus. And it's way more than full-time if people want to really know, but we love what we do. Although it wouldn't be possible without the dedicated audience that we have, that also, fellas, you guys alluded to it, challenge us to be better as well. And I think that is the great part about really the community that's been developed through 3DownNation.com. We get to interact with those people, whether it's at the Combine, at games during the season, or specifically the Grey Cup. Like, I can't remember a Grey Cup, guys, in recent years, or that we've covered together, where we've had so many people come up and just talk ball with us, which is great. I think it shows our impact, but it also shows the community that everybody collectively has created through 3DownNation.com. So that absolutely drives us. And we want to hear, how we can be better. If people think that we can go about our reporting and coverage in different ways, because that ultimately keeps us balanced. So a big thanks goes to you watching or listening the 3DownNation podcast and continually reading all the articles that we have on the site, because truly it would not be possible without you. Let's get to the goods, boys. Today we're discussing a legendary U Sports head coach, Greg Marshall, retiring from the sidelines.
The Edmonton Elks having to make a decision about Canadian QB Tre Ford.
The Toronto Argonauts changing defensive coordinators.
The Hamilton Tiger Cats hiring Brock Sunderland.
And the Montreal Alouettes flipping the ratio at middle linebacker. But first,
two marquee CFL players have signed contract extensions as Levi Mitchell re-upped with the Hamilton Tiger Cats through 2027, and Brady Oliveira inked an extension with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers through 2028. Mitchell's new contract is worth $485,300 in hard money for the 2026 season. There is also one very specific playtime escalator in that deal that could take it over $500,000. Be sure to watch for those exclusive numbers in an article on 3DownNation. Meanwhile, Oliveira checks in at $290,000 in 2026, then $300,000 in both 2027 and 2028, also with a guarantee in that final year. Hodge, which deal is the better value?
I think the better value is Bo. Anytime you can get a Hall of Fame quarterback who is still at the height of their powers, Bo is a two-time defending now East Division nominee for MOP, under contract at what I would honestly call a bit of a bargain rate, that's got to be the answer, right? The Hamilton Tiger Cats have had great success with Bo over the last 2 seasons. Didn't start off great in Steel Town for Bo, but he has preached repeatedly how great Marcellus Bowman, former CFL linebacker turned strength and conditioning coach, has helped him feel better in his body, right? This is a guy who is 35 years old, turns 36 in March, and had previously talked about his struggles to stay on the field. That was a factor late in his tenure in Calgary, spilled over into his first year in Hamilton. And Bo, the last 2 years, has been dynamite. Him and Scott Milanovich, a great fit, staying on the field, making good decisions, staying healthy, and making plays. So I think the answer is Bo. But I do want to push back. I've seen so many people in my mentions on social media, with all my reporting on Brady, saying that it's a ridiculous contract and it's a crazy overpay. And Bo is certainly the better value, but I don't think that this is an overpay for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. I think people need to be reminded the salary cap has gone up. The salary cap 2 years ago, when Brady signed for $230,000, was $5.545 million. We'll call it $5.5 million. It's now over $6 million. And so with the salary cap going up 10%, yes, Brady has received a 20% pay bump since his last deal. But first of all, over those 2 years, he's won a bloody MOP. He's one of 5 Canadian players ever to do that. And over the last 4 years, fellas, I sent a note to CFL statistician Jeff Craver, who let me know that over the last 4 years, the 6,800 yards from scrimmage that Brady has recorded is the 8th best mark by any player in CFL history over a 4-year span. Like, his production is unbelievable. It's the second best, by the way, by a Canadian player. Number one is Andrew Harris, who did it from 2016 to 2019 with the very same team, right? In a very similar role as kind of a dual threat runner. I think that Brady is a special player. I think it speaks volumes that his best football has come after he got paid, right? I think some players work their tails off in the gym until they get their first big contract with a bunch of guaranteed money, and they stop working on their game and they devolve and they devalue. I think you see that every year in the first round of the NFL draft, where guys kill it their last year of college, sign a deal for $20 million guaranteed, and then they go, okay, well, now I can coast. And they end up being kind of league average players, even though they might have been the 6th overall pick, the 8th overall pick in the draft, whatever, because they're coasting. Brady Oliveira does not coast. He claimed in his media availability this week, which I was at Princess Auto Stadium, that he works harder than anybody in the league. And when you look at his production, his fitness level, the amount of punishment he takes, but yet his ability to stay on the field, he's only missed, I think it's 4 games over the last 4 seasons, despite playing that bruising, punishing style out of the backfield. I think it's fantastic what he's been able to do. And he's the face of the franchise, which is the other thing. He's a local guy. He's a Winnipegger. And I think Brady could have earned more money if he had chosen to go to the market. He certainly felt that way. And let's not forget, back in 2014, when he signed for $230,000 with the Blue Bombers, 3DownNation reported that he had offers up to $275,000, which is actually a higher percentage of the cap than Brady's new deal is now. It's more real dollars. It's $290 relative to $275, but the cap, again, is 10% higher than it was. So Bo has the better value here. but I think the Bombers still got solid value. It's not amazing value because it is a lot of money, but I still think it's solid value for a true MOP guy who I think that honestly we should start talking about as a future Hall of Famer. If he's already not already in that conversation, Brady deserves to be in that conversation.
I'm going to disagree with you, Hodge, pretty vehemently here. And I get the label of the running back hater, and I wear that label proudly. I'm going to try and be cautious in my wording here because I
Bad
do
week
believe
for that label, JC.
it is. It is a bad week for that label. Brady deserves to be the highest paid running back in the CFL. Let's start from there. If not for what he's accomplished with his production, but for what he has as a passport as well, right? We're talking about not just a dominant running back, but a dominant Canadian running back. He should be the top of the market at that position. But to me, paying $290,000, $300,000 for a running back is out of whack with the economics of professional football, especially when you consider what other players at premier value positions are being paid in the CFL right now. We just saw Keon Hatcher's new deal as the highest paid non-quarterback in the CFL, $310,000 in hard money next season. Not far off what Brady is about to take home. If you look south of the border, top receivers, top pass rushers, these premier positions, they're making in the $40 million per year range. The highest paid running backs make half that. They top out at $20 million. That is where the value stands at that position. And while I do agree that being Canadian means that Brady is worth a little bit more, I don't think he is dramatically better than other players at his position. I don't think he is irreplaceable. And I think investing a lot of long-term money into a running back is a dangerous proposition given the pounding that you have to undertake at that position and how short their shelf lives are. So I'm happy for Brady that he's getting paid, but to me, this was rich for my blood, even in an era where I think everybody is going to be getting more because of the salary cap. And if I'm a player at a premier value position who is hitting free agency, my price tag just went up because I want to be above what a running back is making by a significant margin. And I think there are positions out there that deserve this. We're seeing the economics of the CFL change here in my mind.
Samuel Emilus would be that player. I'm sure he's happy to see Brady Oliveira get 290, 300, and 300. Of course, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. But, GC, I don't think we can necessarily look directly at the NFL when we're comparing the contracts because there's the Canadian factor here with Brady Oliveira. He is the best non-Canadian quarterback in the Canadian Football League. I think Samuel Emilus could definitely be in the conversation for that title. But I think when you look at Brady Oliveira, 4 straight 1,000-yard seasons, that right now he is that guy. There's a really good chance that Samuel Emilus could get paid more than Brady Oliveira on a year-per-year basis. And that's why I actually think that this is a very fair and I think great value for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers to get Brady Oliveira for that kind of money. He easily could have gotten $300,000+ on the open market from some other teams in the Canadian Football League. There's no question about that. So he's taken yet again a hometown discount to stay with Winnipeg. And oh, by the way, he's a Canadian ratio breaker, legit high-end elite ratio breaker at the position. That said, there is no doubt that the better value deal is indeed Bo Levi Mitchell, who, if you talk to people around the Canadian Football League, could have really pressed the Hamilton Tiger Cats to get to that $600,000 hard money number, if not higher. So the fact that the Tiger Cats get him for less than $500,000 in hard money, and I did mention in my lead into the segment that there is a kicker there that could take him over that, but still, if he makes all the money possible in 2026 to get Bo Levi Mitchell for just over $500,000 is a great value considering he's coming off back-to-back 5,000-yard seasons and took the Tiger Cats from last place in one of those 5,000-yard seasons to first place. So some people might argue, well, there were other factors at play for the Ticats to go from worst to first, but if they weren't going to have Bo Levi Mitchell at quarterback, that was going to be a very risky proposition to go with the next available player if it wasn't going to be Bo Levi Mitchell. So that's why I think it's the better value contract, but I do not at all think that Brady Oliveira's numbers are ridiculous by any means. Like, CFL fans need to get caught up to speed here on the salary cap and the fact that it also has the potential to go up again leading into the 2026 season. So I think it's great value for the Bombers, and Brady shows that he is willing to yet again take a hometown discount. There's people out here talking about, Samuel Emilus going well into the $300,000 range because of how much he could be wanted around the Canadian Football League if he gets to the negotiation window, and also, how he's viewed around the league. Mark Mueller, the Riders' offensive coordinator, who's obviously biased, but told you, JC, after the Grey Cup that he believes Emilus is the best player, bar none, in the Canadian Football League. So there are lots of Canadians who could potentially be free agents, or who are pending free agents, I should say, that really like the deal that Brady Oliveira got. Tyson Philpott as well. Let's not forget, I think he helped raise that bar for Brady Oliveira. But if he would have gone to the market, there is no doubt he would have gotten over $300,000. So I actually think both these deals, I don't really like to sit on the fence, are great value deals for the teams. And let's credit the players for, understanding that it's more than just them in terms of what it takes to win in the CFL.
I don't like the narrative that running backs don't matter. And I'm not saying that JC said running backs don't matter. I know he considers running back to be a lower value position, and I wouldn't even necessarily wholly agree with that. The thing that bothers me about that narrative, however, and those who tout it, are a couple of things. One is it seems to be the only position where we point to like young running backs who do well. And it's like, see, that's why you don't pay a running back. Look at what this young guy did on his rookie deal, right? Like you can look at Greg Bell in Hamilton. He's done some great things. Well, the two teams that were in this year's Grey Cup, Saskatchewan Roughriders, the Montreal Alouettes, both started rookie offensive tackles. And in fact, the Riders have started rookie left tackles 2 straight years. Trevor Reed in 2024 played well enough. He got an NFL shot with the Minnesota Vikings. Peyton Collins was great there. 12 regular season starts, 2 playoff starts for him. And on the reverse side, the Montreal Alouettes had a late first-round pick in Tiger Shanks, who came out of UNLV as a Canadian, mostly American race, but still Canadian-born, legitimate Canadian, and pushed a veteran right tackle in Jamar McGloster out of a job and ended up starting the second half of the season into the playoffs. And no one has, I think, ever said, well, just look at Peyton Collins, look at Tiger Shanks. Why would anybody pay Jarrell Broxton big money, or Stanley Bryant big money, or any of these offensive tackles? Like, you just got to go get a rookie. After all, anybody can play tackle. So we don't do that for linemen. We don't do that for DBs. We don't really do that for receivers. We certainly don't do it for quarterbacks. Oh, look, you can just draft a Nathan Rourke. Why would you ever pay a Bo Levi Mitchell? No one's ever said that before. But we do it for running backs, which I don't particularly like. The other thing with Brady is the offensive line has gotten worse in Winnipeg, right? Yes, there are running backs who are somewhat, to some extent, merchants of great blocking in front of them. Winnipeg's offensive line was the best in the CFL when they were going to the Grey Cup and winning it in 2019 and 2021. I think the offensive line regressed a little in the subsequent years, which was a factor in them not winning the Grey Cup 22, 23, 24. And I thought the offensive line took another step back this year. I don't think it's a bad offensive line, but I think at this point, it's kind of an average offensive line, right? They lost Jamarcus Hardrick to a big money deal with the Saskatchewan Roughriders in 24. They lost Liam Dobson, a former first-round pick, to a big money deal with the Hamilton Tiger Cats in 2025. And that's shown, right? They're going to have to rebuild that offensive line through the draft with some great scouting. And so when you've got a running back who's leading the league in yards per carry behind an offensive line that's just average, I think that's special. And the other thing I'll throw in here is there's one thing that Brady cannot do that is not part of his toolbox, which is the home run, right? He's not somebody who's going to rip off that 80, 90-yard touchdown. The Bombers had one touchdown, or not touchdown, but one run of over 50 yards this season. And it came from the fullback, Michael Krasik, because Michael Krasik is actually much faster than Brady Oliveira in a straight line, which is funny that there's a professional football team with a fullback who's faster than the running back. But regardless, Brady doesn't have that home run number. So the fact that he's 5.8 yards per carry, again, better than anybody, minimum 50 carries, is unbelievably impressive. What that means is he's not getting stuffed at the line 9 times in a row and then ripping off an 80-yard touchdown, which means, yeah, the touchdown's great, but you're stuck in second and long. 90% of the time this ball carrier is getting the ball. Brady is consistently getting you to second and short and second and medium, which is the best thing, really, that you can be as an offense. And Tommy Condell is reportedly coming in as the offensive coordinator. He's a guy who does not run the ball a ton. That'll be an interesting thing to see how that fits, how that shakes up with Brady Oliveira and Tommy Condell. I went and looked. The Ottawa Redblacks under Condell were 4th in rushes per game in 2025. They were 6th in rushing yards per game. So a very middling attack. Obviously, if you've got Brady Oliveira and you've got him making this much money, you should probably feature him. So we'll see how it rolls. But I think this is a rare case where paying a running back makes sense, especially because if you don't pay Brady Oliveira, who are you paying? Like, who are you bringing in? Are you bringing in Sam Emilus? That'd be great, but it's going to cost you $325. And after that, how many Canadian rock stars are out there? Like the Bombers paid middling money in free agency for Dylan Mitchell. How'd that work out? They paid middling money for Peyton Logan. How'd that work out? They paid middling money for Jonathan Jones. How'd that work out? Half our listeners are going, who are these guys? My answer is exactly. The Bombers paid, they took, okay, he's not a $200,000 player, but he's a 120 player. This guy's a 150 player, right? They went bargain bin shopping in 2025. And what they learned is, okay, that was a big old waste of money. We shouldn't have done that. We should have paid our stars, kept Liam Dobson around, it's a year late, but Jamarcus Hardrick around, tried to keep Kenny Lawler around, and then trusted our scouting staff to fill in the rest of the roster. So I think pay the elite players, because there's not another Brady Oliveira in the league. You pay him. He's one of one. It's not like saving money on Brady means you go find another Brady. It doesn't happen, right? I made a list. I took the liberty of making a list. Canadians who I think are capable of taking over a game offensively who are non-quarterbacks. My list is 3 players. Brady Oliveira, Sam Emilus, and Tyson Philpott. End of list. I think there's other guys who are maybe a small step down, but still very good. Got Jalen Philpott. I would put Justin McInnis there. I'd put Nick Dembski there. Kean Schaefer-Baker, DeJon Brissett, Keandre Smith, Kevin Mittal, like all really good players. But to me, there's 3 that are elite, and 2 of them just got paid. And I think Sam Emilus is going to end up making the most of the 3.
I like that list, actually. I like that list a lot. I won't labor the running back point too much more, but I do want to say I think it's a false equivalency when you're comparing that conversation about running backs to other positions, because running back, you only need one of them, right? And there are lots of them out there. That's why, just from a supply and demand perspective, it is a position that is easier to replace, easier to find talent in traditionally. And the Canadian factor with Brady Oliveira changes that a little bit. But when you're talking about offensive tackle, you need 2 of them. And as we've talked about before, there's not a lot of good ones out there on the market. May I present Hampton Ergel to you as a possible rookie that you could plug in there? How did that turn out for the Toronto Argonauts, right? If you look at receiver, you need 5 of them. And while there's increasingly more receivers, right, that's a lot more spots to fill. There is less talent available. Whereas almost every team in the college ranks has a fairly solid running back, and every pro team just needs one of them. What I'm interested in is a point that you just touched on there. And this is now the tying of Brady Oliveira to Tommy Condell, the new offensive coordinator who is expected to be hired as the new offensive coordinator in Winnipeg, because Condell has not traditionally been a run-heavy guy. Now, good offensive coordinators change their offense to their personnel. And when you've got Brady Oliveira as a centerpiece, I think Condell would be wise to do that and alter his philosophy. But if he doesn't, I wonder what that means for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, because now you've wrapped up a whole bunch of money in a position that your likely offensive coordinator, the guy that you're expected to hire, has not traditionally valued particularly highly, and you're going to be putting a lot of additional pressure on a quarterback in Zach Collaros, who I'm not sure if he still has the ability to be that guy anymore. That's an interesting fit to me, and I'll be fascinated to see how Condell adapts, because he's gotten a lot of hate from fans in Ottawa the last couple of years, fans in Hamilton before that. But if he can change his philosophy, if he can embrace Oliveira and revitalize that Winnipeg offense, I think he will be getting a lot of love from Bombers fans who were none too pleased with what Jason Hogan was able to put on the table last year.
There's so much to get to here, I should say. But, Jason Hogan's offense, to be fair to him, I know he's taken a lot of hate, actually scored more points in 2025 than in 2024. So I'm not saying he should be the offensive coordinator, and he's gotten a lot of hate. But you look at that one metric at least he can point to and say, hey, we did score more points. To Tommy Condell, there's going to be a lot of consternation in Bomberland about him. And I think some of it, rightfully so, but then you have to look at the positives that Tommy Condell brings to the table, particularly the Hamilton Tiger Cats offense in 2019 that was absolutely dominant in the regular season. Did it add up to a Grey Cup title? No, but Brandon Speedy Banks won an MOP. You go back to 2015, and I know it's over a decade ago now, but when he was with Zach Collaros in Hamilton, Collaros that season in 2015 was having an MOP-type season before he suffered an ACL injury, I believe, if memory serves. And then, his first couple seasons there in Hamilton, and yes, Kent Austin played a role in this as well. The Ticats went to the Grey Cup in 2013 and 2014, back-to-back years with Collaros as a young quarterback coming off starting just a handful of games with the Toronto Argonauts when he signed that big free agent deal to go to Tiger Town. So as much as a lot of people are going to bang on Tommy Condell, and I think some of it is warranted, you have to look at the positives. And the major silver lining for Winnipeg fans has to be the fact that he has a long-standing relationship with your franchise quarterback in Zach Collaros. You would have to imagine that this is a guy that Collaros would want to work with, again, because of the success that he had with him. That said, I do think the running the football question, if you will, is a valid one. It is somewhat surprising to me that Ottawa actually ranked in the top half of the league in at least rushing attempts per game, as you guys noted, 4th in 2025. So I don't think Condell is necessarily never running the football, as some Ottawa Red Blacks fans think. But when you have a guy like Brady Oliveira, you would imagine that you would want to feature him, as you guys said, feed him the rock. And there's going to be some balance there. Plus, he's so good out of the backfield. Hodge noted this in his multiple articles about Oliveira. He set career highs in receptions and receiving yards in 2025 out of the backfield for Winnipeg. So I think if you're Tommy Condell looking at the situation, you're going like, okay, we expect to coach an offense that has Zach Collaros, who I have a great relationship with, the best Canadian running back in the league. I was going to say best running back in the league. I think he actually is the best running back in the league overall, all due respect to some of the American ones out there. And he does have that ratio breaker factor. And then some of the other weapons that the Bombers have. Nick Dembski, who I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. Pokey Wilson back there. Who's the other big one I'm forgetting about, guys?
I would say right now the receiving core, the only two set starters are Pokey and Nick Dembski, who just re-upped obviously through 2027. I can exclusively report it's $240 hard money in 2026, 245 in 2027. He's got some guaranteed money the second year of that deal, but like Dylan Mitchell was a bust. Jarrett Stearns pending free agent, Carrick Wheatfall pending free agent, and Kevin Clarcy is actually benched late in the year. So I would say right now there's two guys you can write in ink in that receiving core, and I wouldn't even put anybody else in pencil. We'll have to wait and see who the pass catchers are going to be.
Sean also a pending free agent.
Dalton Schoen's not going to be healthy to start the year, even if they re-sign him. So he's not going to be in the roster week 1.
Either way, I think if you're looking at Winnipeg's offense from, talent standpoint, you can say, okay, I know the quarterback really well, and the quarterback, would seem to like Condell. So you would think that there would be some great upside there. And getting Dembski back, I think, is majorly important for the offense. Hodge, I'll let you speak to this in a minute here, but I think that's a value contract that the Bombers got, the numbers you just rattled off.
Yeah, and Dembski was making 225 previously. So with the cap going up 10% and his new contract going up a little bit less than 10%, the Bombers are actually, relative to the cap, paying Nick Dembski less in 2026 than he got paid in 2025. And again, this is something I want to illustrate because there's going to be more of these signings over the course of the next, certainly 6 weeks as we approach free agency. And I always see with these big money contracts, people be like, well, how could this team possibly afford? They must be going over the cap. Well, how can that team possibly afford? They've got this much money tied up in this edge rusher and this DB or whatever, right? So the cap has gone up. So the $200,000 contract from 10 years ago, that was like the crazy home run. Well, that's now $300,000. Like that's just the metrics of the Canadian Football League. That's the economy of the Canadian Football League. The old, 130 contract that a lot of veterans lived in, that's the new version of that is the 180, 190. And the minimum is still low, which I think is something should be worked on for the next CBA. I think the minimum in the CFL should be $100,000 by the time we get to that point, and this new CBA needs to be done, whether that's post 2026 or post 2028, as we've talked about. There is an out for both sides, depending on the nature of the television contract. But regardless, the economics have changed. And that's ultimately a positive thing, that players are getting paid more. We just have to, as people who don't work as agents or work for teams managing that cap, we just have to reset our barometer a little bit. We have to say, okay, 240 for a receiver 10 years ago was like, wow, you must be the best receiver in the league. Now 240 receivers like, wow, you must be a really good receiver, but there's guys who are going to be making 60, 80K above you. I think that's here to stay.
Yeah, with the new cap, I wonder if we'll see any marquee names reach the market. Now, I'm sure we will eventually, but with all that new money out there for teams to re-sign big players with the money that's being thrown at the names that have signed already, if you've got a guy that you don't want to lose, you have the ability not to lose him right now. And I think we will see a lot more of these deals get done before February 10th, and a potentially smaller group of free agents hit the market, certainly with less of those big time names, because they can get that money at home rather than having to leverage other teams to get the big dollars. I think that is a dynamic that's at play right now in the CFL. The last thing I want to say on the Bombers topic, I just brought up the numbers because I think they are worth discussing. When we were comparing Jason Hogan and Tommy Condell in terms of who's the better offensive coordinator, is this an upgrade for the Winnipeg Blue Bombers? In terms of offensive points last year, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers were 7th in the CFL with 23.1 per game. The Ottawa Red Blacks were 8th with 22.1. They are right neck and neck. Net offense, similar dynamic. Winnipeg Blue Bombers are 5th. Ottawa was 6th. These are two teams that were almost the same level of productivity on offense last season. Now, Ottawa had some other factors at play. Obviously, Drew Brown was not able to play the entire season. He only started half the games. So Condell was working with a backup quarterback. But Winnipeg was actually a better offense in terms of the pure numbers last season than Ottawa was, but it was very close. So I think that's an interesting dynamic as you're moving away from Hogan, who people were very vocally critical of. There was, some discontentment in the building among the players, to someone like Condell. The numbers would not suggest, at least based on last year, that they are getting a massive upgrade in that department, although we know that Condell has a history of success dating back to Hamilton.
JC, you brought up a great point that I want to double click on as quickly as possible. Canadian Football League teams are going to be able to sign the players, the pending free agents that they want to sign, because of the salary cap increase leading into 2025 and it coming so late. And then also the idea that it could go up in 2026. We don't necessarily know how much, but you would imagine some of the teams, if not all of them, could have some sort of an idea. And I think that is key to know, because you talk to people around the league on the teams that were either outside the playoffs or in the bottom of the standings, and some people will be like, well, who are the real impact makers that we might actually get a chance to spend some of our money on, that actually get to not even just the window, but free agency? I think, as JC alluded to there, that is going to be a storyline that plays out, that, a bunch, if not the majority, or potentially all of, let's say, the top 50 pending free agents that we ranked right after the season. And when I say we, it was mostly John Hodge, because he's so darn good at it. I was about to swear. I'll hold back. He's so good at it. It's unbelievable. I think a lot of those guys are going to be re-signed to their teams because of the cap increase. So if there's a player or players that you really like, and you're thinking, okay, if it takes $10,000 more to get the deal done, you'll be fine. And you'll be able to be under the salary cap. That is a major storyline that's being talked about in front offices from coast to coast in the Canadian Football League. I think it's real, and it means that if you're some of those teams that were on the outside looking in for the 2025 CFL playoffs, that you're going to have to go and find and develop that talent elsewhere. You're going to have to do it through the Canadian Football League draft, even though for some reason some of our readers and listeners don't want to hear about it. But that's where some of these big guys have come from. Okay, we talk about Brady Oliveira. Let's drill down on this for a second. He was selected by the Blue Bombers in the Canadian Football League draft and has now turned into one of the league's marquee stars, playing in his hometown market. That's how impactful the Canadian draft can be. There's also obviously the negotiation list, American free agents. JC, just to give you a little shout out, I suppose we should talk about the globals impacting teams in the Canadian Football League. Habakkuk Baldonado is a global, but he doesn't play like one for sure. So I think that is something that should be mentioned. Randy Ambrosie's like, yes, the global program. But honestly, the CFL draft is a way that stars can be developed. Tyson Philpott would be another guy, on down the list. It's legitimate, and for some reason I can't understand it, but people need to start paying more attention to it and perhaps holding their teams and front offices more accountable for the decisions that they make, because that's part of the reason that the Saskatchewan Roughriders have built such a deep football team. You look at just the receiving group, and I know a bunch of them are pending free agents, but the reason that they might not have to necessarily pay top dollar to, let's say, Keane Schaefer Bakers, because they can look and go, well, we got a Joe and Del Duncan Busby still on rookie contracts who are legit players who have started games and made impact plays. So the CFL draft is a real thing, and the salary cap going up is too, because, again, from talking to people in Canadian Football League front offices, they don't think there's going to be that big crop of impact free agents that actually get to the market. If you're a team in the CFL right now and you want to sign your players back, your guys, you're going to be able to do that with the dollars that have been unlocked due to the increase in revenues.
Oh, and when you look at the top 50 that we did, number 1, Bill Levi Mitchell, signed. Number 2, Brady Oliveira, signed. Number 4, Keon Hatcher, signed. Number 5, Trevor Harris, signed. Number 6, Jamarcus Hardrick, signed. Number 9, Tyson Philpott, signed. Like, there's already way under half the top 10 available. Now that changes in kind of the next tier. Like Nick Dembski was at 19. He's now re-signed. But a lot of the guys in this neighborhood, Stavros Katsantonis, Wynton McManus, Tavon Campbell, Jonah Tavai, right, Malik Carney, these are guys who are currently free agents. But again, we have a long way to go. Like it's December 19th as of this recording. The window does not open for 6 weeks. Yes, things will be a little bit slower for the holiday season and stuff, but like the point is, this is part of the pushback I want to provide to people who are like, well, why would you give Keon Hatcher that much money? You know, you could spend it on someone else. Well, if nobody else elite is making it to the market, who are you saving your money to spend on? Like, you may as well spend it on the best receiver in the CFL. And that's what I believe Keon Hatcher is. Same thing with Brady Oliveira. It's like, well, if you're not going to spend it on Brady, what if the best free agent who makes it to market's number 28? You're going to let him go so that you can get number 28? Like that doesn't make sense to me. So I think you're very astute to point out the current situation, right? The marketplace. Teams have money to spend, which is not typical year to year in the CFL. But because of the salary cap increase and the timing of it last year, teams have money to spend. And I think there's nobody better to spend it on than your best players. I don't think that's a stupid thing to say.
Even if they're a
running
running
on your best guys. Even if your best player. It's like, yeah, this guy's
just give him all your remaining cap. Just
this guy is an award winner, a future Hall of Famer. He's the face of your franchise. He's from here. He's ultra productive, and he rescues
great work in
dogs,
the community.
But you want to pay him money to play for your football team? You're stupid. How could you be so stupid? You're stupid. Like, I don't understand that argument, but I suppose we're all entitled to our opinions, even if they're wrong. Let's move on. Greg Marshall has announced his retirement after an 18-year run as the head coach at Western University. In his university career as a player and coach, the 66-year-old Guelph native has won, and this is a resume for the ages, folks, 4 Vanier Cups, 23 Yates Cups, 3 U Sports Coach of the Year awards, 7 OUA Coach of the Year awards, and 1 Heck Crichton Trophy. JC, what does Greg Marshall's legacy mean? And who do you think would be the best candidate to replace him?
He's one of the greatest of all time, a living legend. And what he was able to accomplish first at McMaster and then at Western as a coach is absolutely astounding. The U Sports lost a good one this week, and I'm glad that Greg is able to go out on his own terms and spend this time with his family, able to live a little bit more of a life of leisure that he wants to, because he's certainly earned it. In terms of replacements, I think the list of candidates that you want for this job is very short, and at the very top, and there's a big gap between the top and everyone else in my mind, is Michael Faltz, the head coach at Wilfrid Laurier University. Now, this would be a little bit of an unconventional move in the sense that Laurier has been better than Western the last couple of years. But as we've seen recently in the NCAA, that doesn't mean much. Look at the Lane Kiffin situation when there are dollars and cents on the line. And this is Faltz's team. He was the quarterback, a legend for the Mustangs. If they can go out and bring him back into the fold, get the premier coach in U Sports right now, the back-to-back Coach of the Year winner, that is exactly the type of hire that a blue blood program like Western can make, should make, and in fact, I would argue, needs to make going forward here. Laurier, if you want to keep your guy, I know you just signed him to a 5-year extension, but you may have to buck up a little bit more than that if you want to stop the Mustangs from coming.
Greg Marshall, fellas, had, I don't want to necessarily say a direct impact on my football career. And if you're drinking, be prepared because there's going to be a lot of Guelph mentions here, okay? Greg Marshall, Guelph native, played his high school football at the old Bishop Macdonell in the city. Now there is a new Bishop Macdonell. And my life started to intertwine with his when he was recruiting me while he was the head coach at McMaster University. And fellas, to be quite honest, that's where I felt like I was going to go play my university football until he left for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. That really changed everything in my recruiting process. I had gone to all the McMaster High School football camps for as long as I could. Greg was a Guelph guy, as I mentioned. I was a Guelph guy. He had played that angle up. And, another person who was there at the time at McMaster that bears mentioning is Ted Gavaya. Those guys knew how to recruit and put an absolutely dominant team together. Teams so dominant that Jesse Lumsden was not a starter in his first or I believe even second year on the team. Definitely not his first year. He was in the mix. He played slot back, but he was not a starter because they had other more senior players who they felt like were better. And to be honest, I couldn't remember because I was younger and skinnier too. But Jesse Lumsden in his first and second year looked a lot different than Jesse Lumsden did, as one does getting into the weight programs in university football. So that completely changed my path. It ended up with me, of course, going to the University of Guelph and then facing Greg Marshall as a competitor. And fellas, I will never forget the 2007 season because Western came in there on homecoming. They were 0-3. Greg Marshall had just returned to the Mustangs as their head coach, or had just been elevated, I believe, to the top bench boss job. We beat them on homecoming, sent them to 0-4, of course, went out and partied that night. But as it turned out, the rematch happened in the Yates Cup when we were the 5th seed in the OUA playoffs and Western was the 6th seed. And our equipment manager at the time, he's a longtime guy, been around Guelph football forever. His name is Jim Ryan. He won't mind if I put him in the spotlight here. Leading into the Yates Cup, the week of the Yates Cup, he proceeds to put tape on the table in the middle of our locker room and essentially proclaims that this is where the Yates Cup is going to be. The dreaded jinx, fellas, because, and we got caught up in it, we're young football players. We kind of all thought, okay, we beat them on homecoming. They'll come in here. We got a packed house at Alumni Stadium. They won't want to say the official number, but it was well over 10,000 fans. Best crowd I've ever played in front of. And Western beat us. That is a memory that I will probably never forget, but it showed me how much of a competitor Greg Marshall was, because it didn't matter that his team started 0-4, and it should be noted, Michael Faulds was their quarterback at the time. There's another Western connection story there with Larry Haler lying to me, but I won't get into it. But Greg Marshall took his team from 0-4, was able to get them to the Yates Cup and upset us on our home field. Now, they went and lost to the Manitoba Bisons in the national semifinal, but that team was like older legitimately than the Winnipeg Blue Bombers who played in the Grey Cup the same year. So I don't think it was a fair fight. But that was essentially the start of Greg Marshall's unbelievable run at Western University. And I feel like it needs to be said because a lot of people think that I have a vendetta against the school for the expletive that I dropped on national TV about them. That could not be further from the case about the institution, the football team, and Greg Marshall in particular. Okay, there's one thing when you're in competition, you need to flip that switch and essentially become a different person. But Greg Marshall, after that incident and the years following my playing career, was nothing but professional to me. Always made time when I was covering university football, be it for Sportsnet. I know some people can't believe that, but it actually happened. Or the other Yates Cup games that I was fortunate to call with Mark Lee. Greg Marshall always made time for us and told us information about his team, even when the Mustangs were playing against the Guelph Griffins in a Yates Cup the night before that could have helped out Guelph. But he knew that I had the professionalism, that I was doing my job as a broadcaster, and he was willing to tell us, and in particular me, this information. Most notably, it was about Will Finch not going to play in the Yates Cup, which is obviously massive. He knew that I wouldn't just run back and tell Guelph because that was my alma mater. It was about me being a professional. So he did not have to do that. Greg Marshall is an absolute legend in our country in the coaching ranks. There is no doubt about it. His resume, I believe, is second to none. Western was the preeminent program in the OUA for the majority of years during that 18-year run, an unbelievable 18-year run. And I was actually happy to see him finally get that Vanier Cup as a head coach, because for so many years it eluded him at McMaster and then at Western, and he finally got not one, but I believe it was two that he won while he was Western's head coach. And as much as I hated him as a competitor, because I think that's kind of the level you go to when you're playing, I respected him as well because he was just that good at what he did. So, I've seen some discussion about him online, and I think you look at just what he did at McMaster alone, you could argue that he could belong in the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. He's a no-doubter after obviously what he's done at Western, but he leaves massive, absolutely gigantic shoes to fill that program. And there is only one person that could fill that role. You look at Western, they've only had 3 coaches in the last 50 years. I'll steal the line from John Hodge. It's the Pittsburgh Steelers of Canadian university football, okay? They don't just burn through head coaches. They hire legends, as some people, alumni of the program, have put it to me. Michael Folds would fit that bill, but I don't think it's just as easy as throwing a bunch of money at Michael Folds, because there are other factors that come into play here. It should be noted that he has a wife and a family. His wife is actually a former Western cheerleader. That's how they met and got together. But there's the family dynamics right now. I believe, if I have it right, they're equidistant to each other's parents in terms of where they're living in Kitchener-Waterloo, with him being the head coach at Wilfrid Laurier. There's also the fact that JC laid out. The Wilfrid Laurier Golden Hawks absolutely far and away are the better program and football team right now. Look no further than that regular season game where the Golden Hawks absolutely dominated Western. Like, that was potentially, we don't even have the history books, I think, to confirm this, but the worst loss in Western's history. So that plays into the dynamic as well. So I actually think, guys, there's a lot of pressure on Western, their administration, to be able to get Michael Folds there, because that is going to be who the alumni wants. And we usually don't get into a lot of these type of conversations in Canadian university football because it doesn't necessarily have that spotlight, but this job does. And there is certainly pressure on the administration to go and get Michael Folds, because that is going to be not even just the majority of who the alumni want, unanimously who the alumni want, because he would fit that mold of a legend that, for the most part, is going to be a head coach in Canadian university football for decades, as long as he wants to be. When I'm talking about Michael Folds, he's talked to us about not wanting to go to the CFL because there's so much turnover, and he sees the same guys just wearing different hats every year. When he talked about the retreads in the Canadian Football League, he is one of one for this position because of his track record and because of his connections to Western, which cannot be downplayed. So if it is not Michael Folds, I think you need to look at our list on 3DownNation.com in terms of the candidates and say, okay, who has real direct ties here? Because that also hits home with the Western alumni.
Yeah, you guys did a great job with the list. I helped out a little bit, but it was mostly you two. And I would encourage our listeners or viewers to go check out that list at 3DownNation.com, the full list of candidates for this position, or at least our take on who the candidates are or should be. All I'll add to this conversation is that Greg Marshall should be in the 2026 class for the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. I know that the Hall of Fame doesn't particularly like putting active coaches in, but this resume speaks for itself as far as I'm concerned. You cannot write the history of U Sports football without Greg Marshall, and he obviously only spent 3 years in the Canadian Football League as a coach. He did win a Grey Cup, I believe, as a player back with Edmonton. I don't even think I included that in the resume earlier. But regardless, as a builder, you could make an argument that Greg Marshall is as important to Canadian football as any other person who's literally ever been in it. Like, I don't think that's hyperbolic to say. So with him now being retired, I don't think we need to make him wait. He's 66. It's his time. 23 Yates Cups, all the other accomplishments. It's one of the best resumes anybody has ever had for the Hall of Fame. Put him in, and we can all get a chance to celebrate him this fall in Hamilton, where, you know, he was once again the head coach and where he obviously had a ton of success with McMaster, and not that far from where he's had a tremendous amount of success over the last 18 years. So congrats to Marshall on his retirement. It'll be very interesting to see how his replacement fares, whether it's Michael Faulds or someone else.
Yeah, you want to talk about a builder, right? And I won't list off the names because, spoiler alert, that's the list that you can read on 3DownNation.com. But he's literally built the rest of the OUA. You go down the other programs, and almost half of them have a head coach who either worked for or played under Greg Marshall, plus all the coordinators and the other members of staff. You look at the CFL level, same thing. His impact, his coaching tree is massive in Canadian football. And I think you make an excellent point there about his Hall of Fame candidacy.
The other point that I wanted to touch on just real quick was Greg's view of Canadian football was never hidden. Whether it was a CFL or U Sports, you could ask him any question, and I think you guys experienced this on the media availability, but he would give you an honest answer. Like, he was who he was. And I think the memories of Greg Marshall as a coach are easy to remember, him being on the sidelines and him dialed in and that mean, ferocious look on his face. But the memories that I'll remember most about him, at least as a coach, because I hope he lives for a long while longer and enjoys the time with his family and friends in retirement, but are the ones literally in the coach's room there at Western, where he's cracking open beers, passing them around the coaching staff, and just talking football with like no filter. That to me was something that I really gravitated to, because he could also learn, right? He would talk about literally like different decades of football and what it was like to be at McMaster or the head coach with the Hamilton Tiger Cats. What happened, that whole situation, and how he ended up at Western. You know, he would tell you all of these things. So none of this is overstated. I don't want people to think that, you know, we're talking about Greg Marshall in this way just because he's retiring. He is that much revered among his peers, and I think elevated amongst them, and deserves to have the spotlight shined on him.
The Edmonton Elks have to make a decision on Canadian QB Tre Ford, who has a $110,000 off-season roster bonus scheduled for February 1st. Justin, what are Edmonton's options for Ford, and what do you expect them to do?
The options are simple. They're the options that are always available to any team in these contractual situations. They could pay the bonus, keep Trey Ford on the roster for 2026 at his current salary number, but I don't think that's going to happen. You rarely see two quarterbacks on a roster getting paid starting quarterback caliber money. You know, the most recent example would be Vernon Adams Jr. and Nathan Rourke coming there after his tour in the NFL, or his stint in the NFL, I should say, but realistically just doesn't happen. So the options on the table would be, okay, Edmonton surveys the rest of the backup quarterback landscape and thinks that they could get somebody better in there, or perhaps they just want to remove Trey Ford completely, so they're not going to pay the bonus, and simply release him. But I think also, as a general manager should do, Ed Hervey should be calling teams around the league to say, hey, do you want first right of negotiation with Trey Ford if we trade potentially, or we can get, a mid-round draft pick for him or something of the like? Because you look around the league, and as much as people are down on Trey Ford in Edmonton, and I get it, I do actually agree with Ed Hervey saying that I do think he needs a fresh start, new change of scenery. But the tools are there, and he has starting experience. He has a pretty high completion percentage. He's thrown more touchdowns than interceptions. He's obviously got the dynamic running ability. But I think a lot of Trey Ford's future rests with him. I think he needs to be more professional based on what I've heard from behind the scenes, and I'll just leave it at that. But I do think there is some great upside. So if you are a team out there looking for a backup quarterback with the tools that Trey Ford has, like honestly, there's not another quarterback in the Canadian Football League that's healthy that possesses his athletic traits, 4.4 speed, his vertical, all the rest. Unbelievable. But you actually have to play quarterback. So I think that's what lies in front of the Edmonton Elks. The most likely scenarios would be either the Elks trading his rights or them just outright releasing him before that February 1st $110,000 offseason roster bonus. But I don't think that this is necessarily the end of Trey Ford. You look at some other players' careers around the Canadian Football League. I'm not saying he's going to be these players, but sometimes they had to be patient for their opportunity, or people thought that they were done. Like Zach Collaros getting traded to Winnipeg Blue Bombers literally at the deadline in 2019 was a move that not a lot of people thought was going to pay big dividends for Winnipeg. Well, look what it's turned into. I'm not saying Trey Ford is going to be Zach Collaros. I'm saying that you just don't know what can happen, especially when somebody gets a fresh start.
I think it's pretty much inevitable at this point that the Elks will cut or trade Trey Ford, and I think the trade will have to be done kind of similar to what the Alouettes and Elks did last season with McLeod, Bethel Thompson, and Cody Fajardo, with the understanding, okay, we're going to do this deal, but we're going to immediately renegotiate the contract. And I think if another team wanted to, or certainly if they got the go-ahead to renegotiate this contract first, I think that'd be great. The best fit for me is the BC Lions. The BC Lions, Jeremiah Masoli, I don't think was a great fit with that short yardage last year. I don't think he did a great job starting when he got the opportunity, not taking anything away that he's done over his very long CFL career, but I think it's clear he's just not that guy anymore. I think Trey Ford would be a great fit from a passport standpoint behind Nathan Rourke. You have a couple of Canadian quarterbacks there. I think it's also a pretty good scheme fit with how run-heavy Buck Pierce likes to be. But some other teams I think worth discussing are the Calgary Stampeders, where I don't think PJ Walker necessarily lit it up in 2025. Winnipeg needing a Chris Streveler replacement. Streveler's a pending free agent. He just tore his ACL for the second time in as many years. Ottawa with Dustin Crum being a pending free agent. Montreal, Caleb Evans coming off a nasty knee injury. And then we'll see about the Hamilton Tiger Cats. I think Taylor Powell is arguably the best backup in the Canadian Football League right now. We just haven't really had a chance to see him because Levi Mitchell's been so healthy. So if a team goes and plucks Taylor Powell from Hamilton, I wouldn't be at all surprised if the Tiger Cats were to bring in Trey Ford as the backup. So I think there's a bunch of intriguing options. I don't see Toronto or Saskatchewan as options just because I think Toronto's loaded at quarterback, and Saskatchewan, assuming Jake Mayer's back, I don't think there'll be an opening, but those are the teams that I see as fits. And again, I think the best fit among them would be the BC Lions.
I agree with that, Hodge. And I think it's worth noting, you probably don't want Trey Ford as your starter right now for all of the reasons that we've discussed in the past. But if he is willing to embrace that backup role, there's not a lot of candidates out there that, in my mind, are better options than Trey Ford. If you want to go out there and your starter's down and you have to win 1 game, 2 games, a guy with his dynamic playmaking ability, the things that he can do that nobody else can, like, he gives you an option where you're always in a football game, right? If he's got to come off the bench when you're losing, his playmaking ability, he can make something happen. He can create magic. And I think in a small sample size, even if he never turns into a full-time starter again, as a backup, that's highly valuable. To have somebody who always has you as a threat to win games, either off the bench or as a replacement. There's not a lot of other players across the league that you are super comfortable with as that backup. I think you've got one in Toronto in terms of Nick Arbuckle being a steady hand. Jake Mayer in Saskatchewan is a steady hand. I think there's positive things about Taylor Powell and Dustin Crum wherever they end up. But other than that, I think I would put Ford in that Powell Crum tier, and you could order him any way you so choose. But there's a lot of teams that would desire to have that type of guy on their roster.
He started more games than any other backup quarterback outside Jake Mayer, I believe, if my math is right. I mean, Dustin Crum could be close to him or potentially above him, but I think JC's point is well taken that Trey Ford has the most upside of any of those other quarterbacks. All due respect, I think Taylor Powell is a very intriguing prospect because of his years with Scott Milanovic, and it's pretty clear that Milanovic is really high on him. So, outside Taylor Powell, I would think any other team in the Canadian Football League would like to have Trey Ford if you just look at his abilities. But this is where I get into, I think Trey Ford needs to really buckle down here and realize that, yeah, he has all this ability. And it's gotten him to the point where he was a star at the University of Waterloo, won the Heck Crichton Trophy, was selected in the first round by Chris Jones, of all people, and felt like he was sort of bopped around there by that regime. But, he needs to buckle down and be a real, true professional. And I think that's what's going to decide his future. You look at Tyrell Ford, and yes, they're twins, but Tyrell Ford, you talk to people around Edmonton, is so dialed into being the best defensive back in the Canadian Football League on a daily basis that it shows on the field. I'm not saying Trey Ford does not do those things, but you don't hear that from the people around him. So I think Trey Ford, has the ability to still be a really good starting quarterback in the Canadian Football League, but he's going to have to go through this reset here. And, I would agree with you and Hodge that BC is probably the best place for a number of reasons, top among them the ratio, the quarterback position. But I think of a guy like Mark Mueller. If he had Trey Ford as one of his quarterbacks, think about going from Trevor Harris, Tommy Stevens in short yardage, to potentially Trey Ford in some special packages. I'm not saying there's not other creative offensive play callers out there in the CFL, because there is, but Mark Mueller, I think that match with Trey Ford would be very intriguing. But I think you could say that about a bunch of other play callers. So now that we have the starting quarterbacks set in the Canadian Football League for all 9 teams, the next most interesting spot, especially in Ryderville, is the backup quarterback situation. So I think we'll see how that market plays out. The Toronto Argonauts have made a defensive coordinator change. 3Down has exclusively reported, with Jason Chavers out and Greg Quick being hired away from the Montreal Alouettes. Hodge, what do you think of the move?
Well, I think it's an interesting move. I have met Greg Quick in passing a few times. He's been absolutely great to me, though I wouldn't say I know him well. I went and did a little bit of research and had totally forgotten this, admittedly, but 10 years ago, he was the defensive coordinator of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. It's his only stint as a CFL DC thus far. And that year was arguably the worst in the history of the Saskatchewan Roughriders. It was an absolute nightmare of a season. They started the year 0-9, and Corey Chamberlain was fired as the team's head coach partway through the year, and Brendan Taman was fired partway through the year as the team's general manager. Now, I don't think that's just because of Greg Quick. Obviously, the defense did struggle. The team went 3-15. The defense allowed 61 more points than anybody else.
Darren Durant got hurt too, I think.
Well, there was a ton. There was a ton wrong for the Riders that season. I think that was the year Durant tore his Achilles in the first game. But regardless, obviously Greg Quick has spent 7 of the last 8 years as the linebackers coach in Montreal. He spent one of those other years in Toronto as linebackers coach. And I think that it makes perfect sense if you're a team wanting to poach somebody. Poaching someone from Montreal's defensive staff is about as good as it gets in the Canadian Football League. Noel Thorpe's defenses have been excellent there. And I think the personnel is good, don't get me wrong, in Montreal. But when you look at Montreal's defensive roster, I don't see all CFL caliber players at every single position on defense. It seems like that system and that scheme does a great job of taking advantage of everybody's strengths and hiding weaknesses. And so I think if you look at a guy like Dylan Wynn, who is great for Montreal, I wonder if a D-line needy team like Toronto might try to bring him in with Greg Quick. Marc-Antoine Dequoy, starting safety. The Argonauts were one of very few teams that had all-American secondary in 2025, and yet the secondary struggled, right? With Derek Sluka potentially getting an NFL look or maybe fitting in at a different position. Could Marc-Antoine Dequoy be a fit for the Toronto Argonauts? I know he's about as dyed-in-the-wool Quebec as you can get, but I also think Danny Machocha, Montreal's general manager, has made it clear he's not going to pay the sun and the moon and the stars for Marc-Antoine Dequoy, as much as they have ties dating all the way back to their time together collegiately at the University of Montreal. So it'll be interesting to see what comes here in Toronto, but Jason Shivers, I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. The defense was awful last year in Toronto. His defense in Edmonton the year before that struggled, and his defense the year before that in Saskatchewan struggled. And I'm not saying he's not had great defenses in the past. That's absolutely true. I'm not saying he's a bad coach, because he's not. But recently, he has struggled as a defensive coordinator, or at least the units he's been tasked with coaching have struggled. And so I think him potentially getting a look as a DB coach, or maybe a defensive pass coordinator, something like that, might be good for him to kind of get a little bit of a reset before getting a future DC opportunity. The only thing I will add is that Greg Quick will not limit any of the criticism that Toronto's getting for having an old core. You've got John Hofnagel at 72. You've got Jim Barker at 69. Well, Greg Quick is also 69. So we talked last week about Matlock and eating dinner at 4:00. I think those things will just keep coming, though. It's not a bad thing, right, to have an older core. Yes, you want new ideas and new thoughts and new blood, but also the old heads know a lot about football. There's a reason why they've been able to have these careers that have lasted 30, 40, 50 years. So I like the move for Toronto. I do.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how Quick's philosophy has changed since the last time he was a defensive coordinator with Saskatchewan, as you laid out there. I think there's a hope here that he will have adopted some of Noel Thorpe's trappings, the aggressiveness of that Montreal defense, the things that saw them have that much success. But we don't know if that is Quick's philosophy, right? How will he differentiate himself from what Thorpe has done? How will he be different from what he has done in the past? It's going to be interesting to see. This is the first step for Mike Miller in creating his own coaching staff in his first time as a head coach. It was interesting to me that the two of them have never been on the same staff together. They've briefly missed each other at a couple of different stops, but have never worked together in the past. But it's good to know that Miller is able to go outside of that Toronto circle and try and create the best coaching staff possible. I'm intrigued by what Quick will bring to the table. And he's the former director of global scouting, so he's going to go out and get all those global guys, right? We're talking a starting defensive line, Habakkuk Baldonado, Deandrick Hansen. That's obviously
Thibaut Dubai.
Oh, yeah.
All global all the time.
Mike Miller did say he wanted his defense to be aggressive, I believe, if I'm correct, at his opening press conference. So getting a guy who knows Noel Thorpe's scheme does make a lot of sense. That said, there are some questions around the Canadian Football League about how good Greg Quick can be as a defensive coordinator. Those are going to be answered with the Toronto Argonauts.
The Hamilton Tiger Cats have officially hired Brock Sunderland as the team's senior director of player personnel. He is the only addition to the team's football staff, which was finalized without any other changes for 2026. Though interestingly, nobody has the general manager title, which was obviously vacated in September due to the tragic passing of Ted Gavaya. What do you make of Sunderland's hire?
This is a bit of a head scratcher for me, to be entirely honest. I'm not completely surprised that the Hamilton Tiger Cats don't have somebody with a GM title, because we know in the past they've done some funky things with the way that they've structured their front office, either co-GMs or not having a GM in the past. So that's not shocking. Bringing in somebody with GM experience like Sunderland makes sense. But as much as I believe that everybody deserves a second chance in the CFL, this hire was not well received by CFL fans and Ticat fans, and for good reason, right? Sunderland's tenure as general manager of the Edmonton Elks was not a good one. It was marked by dysfunction and collapse. A lot of people blame him, rightly or wrongly, for some of the things that have gone wrong in that organization, removing some of the history there. And there's not a lot of people across the Canadian Football League that you talk to who will go to bat for him and say he deserves this next opportunity. So perhaps there's enough guardrails in place in Hamilton with the staff that Ted Gavaya brought in last year. There's some great names there, some great up-and-comers with Orlando Steinauer's experience in the general manager role. what he's able to bring to the table. Perhaps there's enough around Sunderland that he can be successful at this stop, but it was an interesting hire, to say the least, in my mind.
What I make of it, fellas, is the people who did not necessarily want to go to Hamilton because of the unique structure. You look at Kyle Carson, who is, I think, unanimously held as the top up-and-coming general manager candidate in the Canadian Football League. He decided, no, I'm going to stay with the Saskatchewan Roughriders as an assistant general manager instead of going to Hamilton as the general manager. Another one of those up-and-comers, and I think he would be right there on the list just below Kyle Carson, would be P.Y. Laverne. Am I saying that right, JC?
I believe so.
Pierre-Yves Laverne. Hopefully I'm saying that properly, all due respect. He is the assistant general manager with the Montreal Alouettes, has been integral to their recent success, and he interviewed for the general manager position in Hamilton. But sort of the consensus around the league was that there was a lack of transparency and certainty about the structure or what some of the position titles were going to be, which didn't necessarily entice those high-end, up-and-coming general manager types. You know, if you go back even further, the Ticats put in a request to talk to Mike O'Shea as a head coach and then some kind of title. Also, Danny McManus, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers' longtime assistant general manager, was requested to be talked to. And I think a lot of people thought, okay, that's an easy one because Ted Gavai came from Winnipeg. Danny and Ted had worked together for so long. Danny McManus obviously has the ties as being the last quarterback to win a Grey Cup with the Hamilton Tiger Cats in 1999 as well. He's revered by the fans in that fan base. That would be a shoo-in. Well, that didn't happen. So those would be my questions is, you know, how come Danny McManus isn't the general manager? How come Kyle Carson isn't the general manager? How come P.Y. Laverne isn't the general manager? And some of the other names that have not been made public that the Ticats talked to, how come they're not the general manager? That, to me, is the majority of the story, less about Brock Sunderland. I do think, JC, some of the issues that you raised are true, and people in Edmonton will tell you, right? He got rid of Dwayne Mandrusiak before he could get to season number 50 as the equipment manager. He reportedly banned Joey Moss, a revered legend in the Alberta capital, from the locker room. Like, what are you doing making these types of decisions? And I just can't understand, if you're the Hamilton Tiger Cats, surveying the map or the list of the potential people that you can bring in, and honestly sit there after doing research, if they even did it, and be like, yeah, this is the guy that we want to bring in. Okay, you talk to people around the league, and yeah, they're going to crack jokes. I'm not going to get into it here, and I'll try to keep it professional. The Edmonton football team's record got worse every single season with Brock Sunderland as the general manager. He got fired along with the president, Chris Presson, and the head coach in Jamie Elizondo when they just wiped the slate clean. And if you talk to people around the league, there are people that think that in some form or fashion, that trio set the franchise back decades, not just years, decades, for the damage that they did. Now, a lot of that can be on the plate of Chris Presson, but I think some of those decisions lie at the feet of Brock Sunderland as well. And then there's some people that will point out, okay, Brock Sunderland spent 1 year in Winnipeg. Well, the Bombers had gone to 5 straight Grey Cups, and then they lose in the East semifinal. Now, that might not be entirely fair, but if you're the Hamilton Tiger Cats looking at the track record, that is what I can't fathom. I get that you talk to all these other guys, and that's great that you put in the work there and you talk to the up-and-comers in the league. But how do you honestly sit there and say, yeah, Brock Sunderland's the guy that we're going to bring in? How do you not even just sit there and say, okay, why don't we just elevate internally Alex Russell, a young up-and-coming Canadian, as the assistant general manager? And why do we just elevate the people that are here that already know how we work? Orlando Steinauer likes to work in a very collaborative way. And clearly that worked out for the Tiger Cats in 2025. And I'll echo what JC said. I'm not against people getting second chances. but it's just hard to get away from all these stories that you hear in the past. So let's see if Brock Sunderland can revitalize himself, make up for a lot of mistakes that were made in Edmonton, and become respected around the Canadian Football League again, like he was while he was the assistant general manager with the Ottawa Red Blacks. So I want to keep it as professional as possible, because I believe, as JC alluded to, that the majority of people in our society do deserve a second chance. And hopefully the Ticats saw something that has changed in Brock Sunderland to balance out my earlier comments about him in the past and the decisions that he's made in Hamilton, that he's learned from in his time away from the Canadian Football League and then his year back in it with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers.
It's now time for JC's random neg lister, and it's going to be a 2-for-1 today, gentlemen, because this story is just too cool to pass up. The college football playoff begins today and continues tomorrow. So I was looking for guys that are involved in the college football playoff, and I found the 12 seed, James Madison University, the quarterback. Which one? Both of them. They're both on the Saskatchewan Roughriders neg list as of yesterday. They already had the starter, Alonzo Barnett III, on their neg list
Yesterday being
back
December
to
18th.
Yesterday being December 18th. And they have added Matthew Sluka, the backup quarterback, as well to the neg list. So no matter who's on the field for the Dukes, you can guarantee that they are currently tied to the Saskatchewan Roughriders if they want to come north of the border. This is a fascinating dynamic to me, guys. I think Barnett is a great player. He's a Sun Belt Conference Player of the Year this year. A little bit undersized, has another year of eligibility, could be somebody who comes to the CFL in the future. But Sluka especially is the type of player that CFL teams should be looking at moving forward, because we've talked about NIL and how that might prevent us from getting the top tier of college quarterbacks up to Canada because they've already made their money. Sluka is an example of a guy who was dominant at the FCS level with Holy Cross, won accolades every single year he was with the Crusaders, put up almost 6,000 passing yards, 59 passing touchdowns, more than 3,000 rushing yards, and 38 touchdowns on the ground. A true dual threat, but transferred to go get his bag at UNLV last year, was successful in 3 games as a starter, and then came out and said, hey, they're not paying me the money they promised. I'm going to sit out this season. That soured a lot of people on him. He wasn't able to find the landing spot that he wanted to, and as a result hasn't been able to put together the FBS tape that I think NFL teams will want to see. CFL teams will remember what he was before he transferred and can potentially find a really good player in Sluka if he comes up to Saskatchewan.
Sluka, by the way, spelled differently than Derek Sluka. I didn't think we'd have 2 Derek Sluka mentions on today's podcast, but shout out Derek Sluka. Best of luck with your NFL workouts that you got coming still. It's now time for Hodge's Heritage Moment. On this day in 2014, the BC Lions hired Jeff Tedford as their new head coach. The native of Linwood, California, had played quarterback in the CFL for 6 seasons during the 1980s and started his coaching career as an assistant with the Calgary Stampeders. Then spent 2 decades in the NCAA, including an 11-year stint as the head coach at the University of California, where he coached future NFL stars, including Keenan Allen, Deshaun Jackson, Cameron Jordan, and of course, Aaron Rodgers. Tedford finished 7-11 in his first and only year with BC, losing the West semifinal to Calgary by a score of 35-9. He resigned after the season and went on to become the head coach at Fresno State for 5 seasons over 2 different stints, winning 2 Mountain West titles. He resigned following the 2023 season, however, due to health concerns. So I think on behalf of all of us, we wish Jeff Tedford the very best with his health. Obviously, a tremendous college coach. Didn't work out super well for him in the Canadian Football League, but a fun name to kick around every now and again.
He brought AC Leonard to the CFL because he wanted to bring tight ends back to the Canadian game. Then he becomes a great defensive end. That's one of the weirder stories from the Tedford era.
Is AC Leonard officially retired?
I don't know.
I don't
Good question.
terms are denied.
Let's get to the 3-minute drill, boys. The Montreal Alouettes are making a ratio change at linebacker with Jeffrey Canton Arcu and Tyrell Richards signing contract extensions, while Darnell Sankey was released to get a head start on free agency and is signed with a team that we'll touch on a little later. Do you like the move to go Canadian at linebacker, middle linebacker, Mac linebacker, Mike linebacker?
Oh, my.
We're starting to get a little loopy. The podcast has run a little long. I like the move for the Montreal Alouettes. I thought Darnell Sankey did a very nice job in the middle of that unit, but this team has an embarrassment of riches at linebacker. They've done very well through the draft. And the problem is once these linebackers are off their rookie deals, right, and they need to get paid, well, either someone else is going to pay them to be their starter or you have to pay them to be your starter. They can't sit on the bench any longer defensively because they get paid too much money. So I think this makes perfect sense for the Alouettes. It's a great fit. JC, you've unveiled your all-Canadian NCAA selections for 2025. I know if we let you, you talk about this for 24 hours. So I'm going to ask you, what is the one player that listeners really need to know about?
Rohan Jones, tight end from Arkansas. I love this guy. He's only 6'3", 240 pounds, more of a gadget, H-back, can play in the backfield, can flex out. Offensive weapon is how he describes himself. So I'm not sure how he fits the NFL game, but he's draft eligible this year. He's going to be intriguing for CFL teams, and he was the highest graded tight end in all of the FBS, according to Pro Football Focus. Jamarcus Hardrick said the Saskatchewan Roughriders have a similar core to Winnipeg when the Blue Bombers won back-to-back Grey Cups. Do you agree?
I think so. It's not exactly the same. There's definitely some differences, namely Trevor Harris going into his age 40 season, even though he doesn't want that talked about so much. But I can see what he's getting at, especially if the Riders are able to lock down guys like Samuel Emelis for at least the 2026 CFL season. There's some other key parts. I think you look at defense, Malik Carney would be a major one that Corey Mace probably would like to have back with the way that he moves him around. So if you get those two guys back, plus, an AJ Allen and some of the other key players on the roster, then I can certainly see the comparison getting even better. Rutgers University running back and Montreal native Antoine Raymond won this year's John Cornish Trophy. What can you tell us about him?
Well, I was honored to be able to cast a vote for this award this year, and Raymond, I thought, was the clear winner. 1,200 rushing yards, was a finalist for the Doak Walker Award, which is given to the number one running back in the country at the collegiate level. Raymond is only a sophomore. He's got plenty of eligibility left. Not a big-bodied guy. I think he's 5'10", about 200 pounds. But my goodness, he had a tremendous season and also was productive as a receiver out of the backfield, almost 1,500 all-purpose yards for the Scarlet Knights. So definitely a name to watch for as he eventually enters either the NFL or potentially the CFL at the professional level. Canadian Football Hall of Fame inductee Larry Reda has passed away. How will you remember him?
As perhaps the single most important builder in British Columbia's football's history. This guy was involved at every level, from community ball to high school ball to organizing tournaments and camps. Just an incredible legacy that he has built, a worthy Hall of Famer, and he will be sorely missed. Canadian Football Hall of Fame offensive lineman and kicker Jack Abishan passed away this week at 82. How cool was it that he had so much success at two different positions?
That's the most random position combination ever. Offensive lineman and kicker. That makes me think of like Andy Reid, the famous video when he was a kid, and punt, pass, and kick being this ginormous figure who apparently was the same age as some of the other people participating in the competition, or I should say kids participating in the competition. But man, it's a great feat, to be quite honest. O-lineman and kicker, very rare. Davis Alexander told the media he'd need a, quote, undeniable deal, close quote, to sign an NFL contract. Do you think he'll ever go down south?
I don't think it's likely, but I also don't think it's impossible. The NFL is a QB needy league, and it's true that Alexander isn't the biggest bodied guy. He's also kind of right on that cusp of being too old. But we also saw Michael Riley get a workout in his 30s. Bo Levi Mitchell did his giant NFL tour at age 28. Like, I don't think it's impossible, though I also wouldn't bet on it. I'm guessing Davis Alexander is an Alouette basically for life at this point, barring a pretty shocking change. Mexico beat Canada in the Gridiron Nations Championship. How the heck did that happen?
Well, it's a Gridiron Nations Championship exhibition game, to be clear, not the championship itself. But this was an impressive showing from Mexico. They physically manhandled Canada's defense in this game, in my opinion. They were better up front. And then the two quarterbacks for Canada, Chris Merchant and Michael O'Connor, threw some bad interceptions, 5 total, 2 of which went to defensive lineman Maximo Gonzalez. I think Mexico was the better team from start to finish in this game, and what an incredible accomplishment for them to win against a team that included a number of former CFL players. CFL rushing champion Dedrick Mills has signed a contract extension with the Calgary Stampeders through 2027. Is that a smart move?
As much as JC, you don't want to admit it, I do think it is smart for the Calgary Stampeders. That's a big bruiser who led the Canadian Football League in rushing yards, and his story of redemption, let's say, from where he was, even just in the 2024 season, if I have my years right, to being the CFL rushing king is one that's remarkable. So good on him for scoring a really great new contract with Calgary. CFL quarterback Cam Dukes told the Carter Code podcast he received death threats while starting for the Toronto Argonauts in 2024. What do you make of this?
I mean, it's alarming, and this is something that athletes come out and discuss sometimes. And look, I think passion is great. It's great when people watch sports and feel passionately about it and talk about it, all that. But I'm sorry, anybody who sends a death threat to a professional athlete, or really anybody, as far as I'm concerned, is a loser who needs to get their priorities straight. This is nonsense. This is disgusting behavior. Cut it out. The BC Lions have signed 31-year-old running back Peyton Barber, who you highlighted in JC's Random Naglister last week. How do you think Barber will do in the CFL?
I'm interested to find out. He hasn't taken a snap since 2021 when he was with the Las Vegas Raiders. He's been out of football that entire time. Seems like odd timing for a comeback at 31 years old, but I will hopefully be speaking to Barber here in the near future and getting the goods on why he wants to make a comeback in the CFL. And finally, coming full circle, the BC Lions have signed 3-time All-Star linebacker Darnell Sankey after his release from the Montreal Alouettes. Is that a good move, Dunk?
I do think it is. It could be a great move for the BC Lions. Sankey wasn't let go necessarily for poor performance reasons in Montreal. It more had to do with the ratio. I think he can improve that BC Lions defense. He's a guy with championship caliber experience, knows how to win a Grey Cup, so that can definitely help the BC Lions.
We thank you as always for listening to the 3DownNation podcast. For Justin Duncan, JC Abbott, I'm John Hodge. We will be back, but not until likely the first full week of January. So pencil in something like January 5th, 6th, 7th. So we'll take a couple weeks off here, recharge our batteries, enjoy the holidays, and celebrate. And then we'll be back for all the latest news, insight, and analysis on the Canadian Football League and more. We'll see you then.